We live now in times of the biggest number of armed conflicts, the biggest number of, again, civilian deaths after the Second World War.
What is the biggest challenge working in diplomacy as a Minister of Foreign Affairs?
It was quite brutal to be a newcomer. It takes a lot of wisdom.
And I am really, really excited to welcome from the Republic of Slovenia Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tanja Fajon.
I grew up in the times of former Yugoslavia.
You know what it means when borders shift.
That was definitely, that marked me, because suddenly coming from Slovenia, former Yugoslavia, after the wars, I had to deal with all of that. I was young, but I suddenly had become a European. And that was in a way also my dream, this European dream that we had here in Slovenia.
What does it take to be a woman on the political stage?
I never really considered myself to become a politician.
You've had major roles in politics.
It is a learning process. And unfortunately, you have to deal with that as a woman in politics.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode on Female Empowerment, the podcast. My name is Simone, and I am really, really excited to welcome from the Republic of Slovenia Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tanja Fajon. Tanja, it's an honor to have you on the podcast here, and I'm super excited to hear more about your career, your story.
Thank you so much, Simone, and thank you for inviting me. Hello to everyone.
Well, the first question always goes to the woman you became, or the woman you are now. You grew up in turbulent times, the Yugoslav war. You know what it means when borders shift, when uncertainty is everywhere. And that is also why diplomacy is very important. So my question to you is, the woman you are today, what made you, or who shaped you? Because as I mentioned previously, I think and I believe people and circumstances, they can shape us into the person we're becoming. And I'd love to hear your story.
Thank you so much. I think there are so many moments in my life that shaped me from private to professional. You said that I grew up in the times of former Yugoslavia. Yes, we had bloody wars. And I started my professional career as a young journalist. Actually, I was studying, and at the same time, war in Slovenia started. So I came to a commercial radio of our capital. They invited me to go out to the market to ask for the prices. So that was my beginning of journalistic career at the same time when I was studying. And I started working with different newspapers, media. At the same time I was studying. And then, of course, I had also personal experience with a very deadly disease. So everything shaped me in a way. I became, I think, a strong person, a lot of curiosity, a lot of adrenaline. I think that was my driving force, and it is still today a driving force. I think I have always a lot of curiosity, a lot of questions, and I'm interested to get to know other people, other cultures, other histories, other countries.
Qualities I'm sure you need as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, right?
Yeah.
Is there a moment that stands out to you during that time growing up? Like a moment you'd recall in an instant?
My journalistic career took some 20 years. Certainly, I was in a way privileged because, of course, it was due to my career and the results, I suppose. I became a foreign correspondent in Brussels, and I had a wonderful period, very exciting period, because I was, for the last 4 years when Slovenia was joining the European Union and NATO, a correspondent for public broadcaster in Brussels. But also the first 4 years when Slovenia was already a membership. So that was a very interesting period. That was definitely, that marked me, because suddenly coming from Slovenia, former Yugoslavia, after the wars, a lot of people still mixed. Where is Slovenia? Where is Slovakia? We had stereotypes. We were coming from the part of Europe where were still bloody wars. So I had to deal with all of that. I was young, but I suddenly had become a European. And that was in a way also my dream, this European dream that we had here in Slovenia.
When you entered politics, was there a moment, because usually there's a moment when you decide I don't want to just observe. I want to step in and I really want to work in this area. Was there a moment for you like this when you entered politics or when you decided to enter politics? Because you don't come from a family that was active in politics, right?
No, my family were mostly musicians. Quite a big of part of family were musicians, including myself. I played violin and the guitar. But my father was a journalist, but also following, of course, politics. I never really considered myself to become a politician. So now I always say, never say never, what is about to come. But at that time, looking now back, when I was invited to join politics, journalism and politics have something in common. I think as a good journalist, the communication is very important. So in politics is the same. If you're not good in communication, you can have wonderful ideas, but you will never convince people to follow you.
You've had major roles in politics. You became an MEP, member of the European Parliament, as vice chairwoman of the Social Democrats, and now deputy prime minister and also minister of foreign affairs. Can you walk us through that journey? Because there's milestone after milestone, and it's just genuinely impressive. And I'd love for you to just explain you how this journey was for you.
I mean, when I joined the politics, it was still when I was in Brussels. I was a journalist. And at that time, the prime minister or president of Slovenia was also a party leader, invited me to go and run for the elections back at home. And it was, in a way, my political family that my party was always raising me and brought me up. In fact, when I joined politics, I went to the election campaign, I returned home, I was living abroad. I was familiar, no one face in the society, but still it was something new for me. I have to say that at that time I didn't really imagine what does it mean to join, the domestic fight, the elections. It was quite brutal to be a newcomer. I was, I think, through maybe my personal experience, I had to fight some years for my life. I think I was not afraid. Everything was easier. Also politics was in a way easier. I managed to be in the first time in 2009 elected first time as a European parliamentarian, and then I did 2-3 mandates. I became a party leader in the meantime of Social Democrats. And what was also interesting, that one time I do remember, and that was maybe some breakthrough also for me, I was a second one on the list. We still didn't have female candidates on the top of the lists. Mostly was still dominated political life. But I won the elections with preferential votes. So the party leader was kicked out. I won the elections as a female, not on the leading position. And that was something that really also gave me an additional push. So I became the deputy leader of Social Democrats in the European Parliament. Even though coming from a small country, I was a small delegation. But also as a small, you always had to try to find allies, friendships, partners. You had to be very skilled to make your network around. And I think I managed that quite well.
Wow. No, this is really impressive. But I have to ask, when power, pressure, and compromise, they collide. Eventually in politics, it always happens. What is the hardest part for you when something like this comes to decision making?
I think, of course, it's also in politics, one should not really admit but yes, of course, it is a learning process. New environment, new colleagues, new people, even new topics. You have to be flexible. I think you have to really be open-minded, to really be curious and always have questions and try to hear the answers and also understand them. So I think I always manage to, leave the pressure, even though as a woman in politics, I was quite often alone. especially when I was here in my region or down south. Often it happened that I was the single woman at the table and a lot of male politicians. So this is also a challenge where you as a woman have to prove more. We are more maybe focused, putting more energy, and then still quite often they judge you the way you look. And unfortunately, you have to deal with that as a woman in politics.
How do you deal with that, if I may ask?
And now I can say I'm already so many years in politics that I try to pass the message to younger generation. Don't be afraid. And don't allow that people judge you on the basis whether you have a nice hairstyle, a good outfit, whether you, I don't know, I always wanted to stay woman, to be, have my idols, also to be dressed like a one, and not to become, now I have to behave as man or take over some rules that were created by male colleagues in the politics. So I was doing pretty well. I think I was courageous enough. Maybe one thing that I had to deal was, I don't know whether it was easier or was more difficult not having children, but that was because of my disease. Often people asked, so yeah, you are so ambitious, you just want, to focus on politics. No, I didn't have a choice, but at least I can be good at what I can be doing. So it gave me a bit more place, also within my family for sure. But also I had a lot of colleagues and friends that always supported me. And I think that is very important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, because what you're saying is a key message. Something like that wouldn't have been said to a man. Usually, at least I have not heard.
I mean, honestly, I recalled a few years ago one campaign when I was a party leader and we had the elections and they were all just male around me. And I was one, maybe among two women leaders. And the whole, after one big confrontation at the TV studio, people and journalists were dealing how I was dressed, not what I was saying. And that doesn't happen to other male colleagues in politics. Sometimes it's strange to say, it's not my main occupation, I got used. But quite often women, unfortunately, and we really have to say that aloud, on social media we have comments very inappropriate that are more sexy, chauvinist comments that our colleagues don't really hear or read with the same extent as we do.
And it's growing bolder in a negative way with AI.
Certainly, yes. I mean, yes, certainly. But it's okay that we say it. I think sometimes even I realize that, it's a lot of negative comments also on social media. You see that in the last few years, I simply stopped reading it because most likely I wouldn't be doing today politics anymore because it's so negative environment, especially on social media. But mostly my family was hurt more than I, because I got used. My skin got, harder. I didn't take it serious anymore. You start living with it. But those people around you that know you different, they can be really hurt. No one really thinks about that.
Yeah, that is the third party they're hurting with it. Absolutely. Going slightly back to diplomacy. We're living now in times where peace seems to be fragile, or the global borders seem to move, so to speak. You're a person, you've experienced what happens when diplomacy fails. What does to you peace truly mean?
Slovenia is a country with 2 million inhabitants. We have our independence for the last 30 years. We had bloody wars as we started our conversation. And for us, it's in our DNA if I say peace and dialogue. We are not a country that is a big military power or a country with natural resources or a country that started or ended the war. So for us, there is no alternative than having a dialogue than having multilateralism, searching for political solutions, not military ones. And in today's geopolitical reality that is very complex, where we see more the rules of the power than the power of the rules and more transactional relations, this is, of course, a big threat to us. So we are really trying to be principled. For us, it is extremely important to see the system of multilateralism being in place and the world order.
If I may ask, how do you navigate a diplomatic room, especially when it comes to negotiation? I feel like as women, speaking of my own case or situation, I find negotiating quite difficult. And I was just wondering if you have some best practice tips on this one and how to negotiate in a diplomatic room.
I mean, if I had the best practice or the answer to share, we would have maybe some less wars around, at least during my term. But no, I mean, seriously, I think that it takes a lot of wisdom to have a dialogue and to be capable of reaching a compromise, because it's not so much a question of winning the war, because there are no real winners. You have to, I always tried through my career, one thing is to have a dialogue and one thing is to try to listen and hear and understand. But then you have also to be capable of finding a compromise. And usually we live now in times of the biggest number of armed conflicts, the biggest number of, again, civilian deaths after the Second World War, and deaths among humanitarian workers. So it is the time where we would need a lot of wisdom, but mostly we need governments and leaders that are really willing to protect civilians, not going by force and change internationally recognized borders, and respect the UN Charter, territorial integrity and sovereignty. So these are my principles that I'm committed to. And also, when we were in the last 2 years, Slovenia, a non-permanent member in the Security Council, I had a lot of diplomatic activities. In a very complex geopolitical environment, we really tried to be an honest broker. So someone that tries to find a, compromise, a solution, but also that is this solution based on international law. So we were never really criticized about having double standards, be it the war in Gaza, or the Russian aggression in Ukraine, or a terrible humanitarian situation in Sudan or else.
What is the biggest challenge working in diplomacy or working as a Minister of Foreign Affairs?
I mean, the challenge is certainly now when we see that, as I said before, we are really, it's not anymore these traditional maybe allies or relations based on international law. You have to find, like-minded countries. Slovenia is part of the European Union. It's very important to have good neighborly relationship. We are working close with the Western Balkans to bring them through the necessary reforms to European Union to keep peace and stability. But also we are part of NATO alliance, and still we have to open our eyes to other parts of the world, to look into what is happening in Africa, in Asia, with our global partners. So we tried to, have a dialogue, be present, because at the end of the day, we live in a globalized world, that everything is happening on the other side of the planet. It sooner or later touches us. So I'm glad that we managed to open some new embassies and increased our presence around the world.
I'm jumping now back to another topic, a topic that we briefly discussed, but I'd love to dive more into it in the terms of Slovenia, because Slovenia is a best practice guide when it comes to gender pay gap and gender pension gap. Also, the share of female parliamentarians is quite high. In other countries, we're seeing it's decreasing. So it is a best practice. What did Slovenia write in terms of domestic policies for gender equality? Like, what were the steps that were implemented when it came to this issue?
I'm a lucky one or a privileged one because I am living in times when we have a quite strong leadership. If I look at that, I'm the first female foreign minister in the history of my country, but also I have good colleagues and friends. The first lady that is the first president of Republic of Slovenia, female, again in the history of our country, and also the lady that is the first time Speaker of the National Parliament. So we had quite some breakthrough also before in the past. In our society, I can say we did some really good results when it comes to equal rights of women. Still, there are some pay gap between the genders, and we often talk about that. Still, we need quotas, to have enough women on the elections and also in the high positions in business environment. But these are necessary steps. Still, I think we have so many highly qualified and educated women. We need to give them opportunity, and we try to create an environment to really boost ladies, good candidates, best ones to reach high positions in politics and also in business environment. And I also try with my personal example to lead, really raise awareness among younger population, give them opportunities, tell them what is at stake, but also encourage them that we need them.
This encouraging is so, so important. In almost every conversation I have with, may it be parliamentarians, ministers, young women in positions, they always tell me, people asked me, and they had to kind of encourage me to not take the risk, but really go for this position. Encouraging young women or women in general is very, very important. So thank you so much for pointing that out. You yourself are a very prominent voice for women when it comes to women in foreign policy. Why do you think is this approach so important, especially in the foreign policy, diplomacy area, when it comes to also encourage women to go for these positions, but also at the same time protect them from being undermined from right-wing forces? Because very often from right-wing forces we hear that, or they're saying that women should not, it's not the quota, but the quality. But these two do not exclude each other. So how can we protect them, and why is this approach so important?
I mean, I often have the chance to speak with my female colleagues, maybe because we are still in small numbers, not at least in parity. We have always our gatherings, we discuss how we can still encourage young people or women to join us, to be leaders. We have to put them in the decision-making process, even the negotiations for peace. At the end of the day, look to our planet. We have half of the population are women. So if we would have this parity everywhere, I'm certain even statistics prove that the results and the well-being of the society can be better. So, and we have women, a lot of good women. I was just recently being engaged in a very interesting discussion. Is it a time to have a first female leader on the top of the United Nations as a Secretary General? Yes, it is the time. Think about the 80 years long history. We haven't had a single woman on the top of the institution. For the organization that was always claiming we need equality, we need parity, we need to bring women in the decision-making process. And I think that this is a time we have to fight for it. It is still a lot of place to improve.
The thing is, I always find, and this is also why I have this podcast, if we don't see women in these positions, we don't aim for them, as neither the young girls or women in general, which is why it's so important to show the role models. But you rightly said so. We're step by step getting these role models, these examples. It's possible. And it's time to have the women in these positions. Absolutely. I really have to ask this one. What does it take to be a woman on the global political stage? What does it take?
I think just first you have to have your personal motivation. You have to have some beliefs. Don't be afraid. And also, I don't know why I always come back to curiosity. Because if you want to be open-minded, with some emotional intelligence, that you want to understand what is happening around, where I can contribute myself, how I can make the world a better place. It just goes natural way. In my case, I didn't plan it. I didn't plan anything of it. It just went natural place. I cannot tell you where I will find myself in a year time. Maybe it's just sometimes without planning, sometimes spontaneous, sometimes circumstances brings you there. But I think deep inside you, there is an understanding where is your mission. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I love it. This curiosity, it is very important because it opens your mind to other realities, how the world looks for other people, the other points of views, perspectives. And so, yeah, absolutely. I'd like to tap briefly also into this entire decision-making process. How do you approach this process? Because making a decision, there's not like a 101 guidance book because it varies from situation to situation, especially when it comes to challenging issues and situations. How do you usually approach these?
I mean, I can share a little bit of a personal experience being now in the government myself. You always have to first, when you know what you want to do, you have, of course, to have all the information. It's a system, you get a lot of information, a lot of different voices, not always the same understanding. And then you have to shape first inside, smaller groups, getting bigger, that you have a support understanding, and then you go step by step. It's not always easy. Sometimes it requires a lot of time, a lot of stubbornness. You have to make sure that you are right. That is sometimes also difficult. Where I found myself maybe on a thin ice, that it happens, of course, a lot of times, when you believe this is right, because I believe this is right. On the other hand, there might be a threat to, your either national security or to the state, because all political decisions have certain consequences. So sometimes the decisions are very difficult. You take a lot of responsibilities on your shoulder. But I wish to say that for me, it's also a very important teamwork. So that it's not only me being very stubborn, but have, understanding of people around. That is also a teamwork. So I can always say all the results are not my results, but are people around that worked with me. We really analyzed situation, we discussed the situation, and at certain point in time, we believe this is right.
What do you wish that young women knew before ever stepping into power? What is the one advice you'd give them?
Don't hurry up. Don't hurry up. Don't be too young. I mean, you learn through the experience. It's good to grow up slowly, to learn from maybe those that are there before you or others. Don't believe everything will be happening over the night and you can change the world over the night. It's good to be ambitious, but I think it's also good that you are learning and that you are not afraid of that.
Wow. Last but not least, looking at the upcoming parliamentary elections in Slovenia, what do you expect or what do you see coming in terms of feminism in case the right wing wins?
I am happy to say, as I am, proudly also presenting progressive force in Slovenia, so Social Democrats, we have parity. So we open the door to have half of candidates on our list that are female. It is important. That, of course, doesn't go on the account of quality candidates. As I can say, as a female, I would never accept that I am there in politics just because of quota. No, because I obviously did something well, and I believe there are many other women to be capable of doing good. So I hope that we will not lose the momentum having enough and even more women in the national parliament and also in the government where I sit now, because we had a really very good balance, very good representation of women, and I do hope that will stay for the country also in the future.
Wonderfully said. Quota doesn't exclude quality, as your career proves. So thank you so much. I really like this deep dive. It was really a deep dive. So thank you so much. And I'm even more excited to dive into the next part, which is a more informal part called Fast Question and Answer, where we'd like to get you personally a bit better. One thing people always tend to get wrong about politics.
One thing people always tend to get wrong, that maybe we are people with a lot of corruption, no compromises, without humor, boring people. I don't know. We are exactly all the others.
I don't think politics ever gets boring, right? It's like every day there's something new. Okay, well, thank you for clearing this up. What's your go-to advice when it comes to dealing with criticism?
Try to deal with facts. Try not to criticize back just the purpose of criticism, but never be mean and never, be a good example. Be better than that. So don't use nasty words. Don't offend. Don't use hate speech. Be better than that.
I love how you phrase it, be better than that. A book, podcast, or maybe article that you recently read or listened to that made you change your view or perspective on an issue.
I like to read novels that have some real life behind. I just recently read a beautiful story about Palestine and Israeli boy living together before the conflict. And it's a beautiful story that goes back in the history and shows so many injustices and nonsenses what the war and the conflict brought to the land and people living once together.
What is the most underrated leadership skill?
Underrated leadership skill. Underrated. Emotional intelligence. It should be overrated, but it's underrated. Not being populist. Does that count?
Yeah, I'd say even, emotional intelligence is so important, but also, not being a populist, just stay centered, stay in the middle. What is the most adventurous thing you've ever done or experienced?
Well, I do so many things. I mean, so many things. I love sports that have some adrenaline. So maybe the last one was that some good year ago, I did a license for the heavy motorbike. Being above
Wow.
50, it's maybe strange in a woman, but yes.
No.
So I'm now a motorbike driver. I love deep diving. I love jumping from the plane. So maybe it goes well with adrenaline you need in politics.
This is incredible. And I thought kickboxing was adventurous. But maybe at some point I'll find the courage to jump out of a plane too.
Yeah, that is quite a lot of adrenaline.
It sounds adventurous, definitely. The complete opposite now. How do you unwind after a stressful day?
Lately, I feel that it was really a lot. It was a lot. And I started doing yoga. And it calms me down. And I think I really need that. I always rejected yoga. I thought that's too slow for me, no excitement. But I see now maybe it's years, it's a lot of impulses throughout the day, a lot of people, travels, everything that I need to wind up in peace, quiet, without people around, not too many voices. And I found some space and silence in yoga.
What is your go-to advice on productivity?
Certainly would be have a good sleep. I don't manage. So I know when I have a good sleep, my day is so better. But try to have some islands of time for yourself and for your friends and for the things you like to do.
To recharge battery, right?
Exactly. It's not necessary much, but just that you can a bit switch off and see there is still some other life outside of your box daily routine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is a hobby you recently picked up from your childhood again?
From my childhood again, hobby. Not sure that I have time for hobbies. I do not have really hobby currently, apart from some recreation that I'm doing, but it's not the same that I did when I was a child. I don't think that playing tennis or skiing counts among those hobbies, but I do that.
Yeah, no, and it is absolutely a hobby. It's definitely a hobby. I've been trying to get back in golf. I was playing golf when I was living in Spain, but
Yeah.
I haven't found a time yet, but hopefully soon. But so yeah, sports definitely counts as a hobby.
Okay.
Definitely. Okay, last but not least, what is which impact do you want to leave behind?
I wish that people see there is a lot of honesty in politics. That there can really be a lot of politicians that wish to do a change and they can remain themselves. So to be honest with yourself, that is recognized also with the others. It makes sense. But sometimes I say to myself, I can look to the mirror and have no problem to sleep with myself. And I wish that is recognized as a good quality.
Definitely, because I do think being honest with yourself also helps in achieving goals, not just one's own goals, but in general, the things you're fighting for. If you truly know yourself, and I do believe you can only know yourself fully if you're honest with yourself, if you don't run or you don't hide from yourself. So that absolutely makes sense. And I would say thank you so much for not only giving us advice, but also letting or sharing your career advice on what it's like for you and how you see the world. I love to see how the world through other people's eyes, and you've experienced and also achieved a lot. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I really wish you all the best, and especially our young, hopefully, female future leaders that will join us at a later, who knows, stage.